Hi, my name is Thea and Pham. Today is Tuesday, March 24th, 2026. The time is 1 p.m. We are at the Pewaukee VFW. I am interviewing Ed F. Marconnet, who was born on October 16th, 1933, in Monona, Wisconsin, directly after the Korean War. He served between 1954 and 1956. Ed was a E4 in the Army, and he served as a motion picture photographer. This interview is sponsored by the Bell Tower Memorial. Hi, Ed. How you
Hi,
doing?
Thea, good. We had a quick pre-interview as a librarian. That was nice.
Definitely. It's an honor to be here with you today.
Good.
So, to start things off, do you mind telling me what you were doing before you entered the service?
Yeah, I was working in an office down in Streeter, Illinois, and it was a company called Thatcher Glass, and they made glass bottles, beer bottles, and milk bottles, and pop bottles, and all kind of things like that. I was a production clerk. And I went to that job when I got out of high school in 1951, and I was there for a little over 2 years before I went in the service. So,
Was that your only job, or your first job, rather?
well, yeah, it was my first job uh, out of school. I'd had part-time jobs in school, and I had a paper route in high school for 4 or 5 years, and that's the way I made a little bit of money to be able to buy a Coke once in a while if I could have it. My folks didn't have it, but we had a wonderful family down in Winona, and that's really Illinois. Winona's in Illinois.
Oh.
Forgive me for turning that, but that's an important part because my whole family grew up there in that community. So
When did you come to Wisconsin?
we came to Wisconsin in 1964. Um, was switching jobs. By that time, I had went through the service and for 2 years, and and then was out and went to business school and was working. I got my first job in an office that sold life insurance, but I was kind of the in-office manager there for a few years, and that worked out well. And it was in '64 then I transferred to the same company office here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So I lived there ever since.
All right, moving on to the next question. What led you to joining the Army, especially with how the Korean War had just ended?
Yeah, well, I had a real good friend. Now his first name was Vern. I won't put in his last name, but we were real good friends from little kids to all the way through high school in my same class. And Vern Lee said one day to me, he says, "Ed, I'm going in the Army." And I says, "You get drafted?" And he says, "Well, yes." But he says, "I volunteered for the draft." We could, in those days, we could move our name from wherever it was on the list to the top of the list. So when they came down in Marshall County, Illinois, was the county seat, when the government said, "You got to send us 2 more people," they go to the top of the list and bingo, there's my name. I don't know who else it was that went at the same time, but that's the way it worked. And my thinking behind this, and talking to Vern Lee and all that, is we're kind of stalemated here in whatever jobs we had because everybody knew we were going to get drafted in the Army. So anyway, it worked out well. I went into service and in 1954, March of 1954.
I know I know you're the youngest of 9 children. So like what did your siblings think about you advancing your draft date?
Oh, I don't think they worried too much about it, but I will tell you this about my siblings. My oldest brother Earl, he was born in 1913, so he was 20 years older than me, and he spent 35 years in the Navy, and he went in as a whatever the lowest rank is, and he went clear up to lieutenant commander in over 30 years, and then he retired at about 55, and he died at 56 of a heart problem. My brother James, he was in the Air Force in World War II, mechanic of airplanes specialist, and he lived in. He had moved after the service down to Pensacola, Florida. But then my brother Gene, he went for his draft physical, and they said, "Hey, you got rheumatic fever," and that was the end of his service. My brother Bob spent some time in the Air Force, and then there's me. So that's all the boys. The 3 girls, one of them married a guy that had World War II service, and Byron was quite a guy, you know, and he had been in real battles and what have you. So have I answered that question pretty good?
You definitely have. All right. So, next question. Can you tell me about your early weeks of training and how you like adapted to military life?
Well, number one, they shipped me to Chicago, and then they sent me down to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, which was known as the 6th Army Division, but it was mainly a training camp. And so you spent like 12 weeks there. And you learn, you know, you see the things like on Andy Griffith's show and what have you, and the tough sergeants and everything. And you learn you learn the ways. You're always taking, and so that you know how it worked out for you, you know. And so I managed to get through basic training, and I wasn't an athlete, but I was concerned about that. But by golly, I made it through in basic training. And then I got to go to good fortune to get assigned to go to motion picture photography school, which is like a news photographer, and that was like 10 weeks or something at Fort Monmouth, New Jersey. So anyway,
When you went to the motion picture school or photography school, what was that like? Like what did they teach you?
well, mainly they taught us one thing that sticks in your mind is long shot, medium shot, and close up. That's what you want to come up with. The picture of the area that you're shooting, the subject you're shooting from a distance, medium shot, and close up, so you can really recognize what's going on. And the truth of the matter, it was a wonderful assignment because I liked photography, and so I really got lucky in getting that as my military occupation specialty, you know. MOS 1041 at the time. There's some things you just always know. And that was a joyous thing. And it did a couple of things. It got me 1,000 miles away from my hometown, someplace I'd never been before on the East Coast, you know, in Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, you know. And so that was an experience in itself.
Yeah, you hadn't traveled that far before that?
No. Well, yes, at high school graduation, our class went on a class trip, which did go to Washington, D.C. was the primary thing. But anyway, that's not part of this
Yeah.
necessarily. Go ahead.
Another question with your basic training. What were you and your sergeant like? What was your guys' relationship like?
Well, I had this typical sergeant of our barracks, and like all of them, they talk loud and they give you hell and this and that and the other, and they keep insisting everything. And but I was a maverick, and in basic training in the last week, you go out on bivouac. And it starts with a 20-mile hike out to the camp out area. You go out of your thing. And I tripped over a wire that was maybe 12 inches off the ground and hurt my leg. And my leg was swelling up over my boot. And he wouldn't let me go to the med people about it. So when we were back in the barracks one night at midnight, I went down to the medical place, and that guy didn't know what to do. He sent me to the hospital. And one great thing that happened there, when a lot of people are loudmouth, there I had a doctor that understood what was happening. I was going to lose. I wasn't going to be able to finish my basic training, and I would lose my orders to go to photo school, which was a real wonderful opportunity for me. And the doctor called my sergeant. He was pretty unhappy when I got back to the barracks. But by golly, I learned that if you're careful, and I would compliment that doctor, because he did have, I think in that role, he needed to be more sympathetic to the problems. So that's probably enough of that for right now. What's your next question here?
My next question is, when you went to Korea, what was the service like there?
Well, we got on a boat for about 2 weeks, because boats don't go very fast. They only go maybe 20 miles an hour. So they only make about 400, 500 miles a week, a day, because they go all night and everything else. But getting into Korea, they dumped us off in Incheon, and then put us on a rickety train to go from Incheon was right near Seoul, and they put us on a train to go down to Busan, which is now known as Busan. And there I was, where my photo lab was, that I spent a good part of my time. Korea itself was what I would consider a third world country, but it was really quite a place, and it's a cherished part of my life.
What were the locals like there?
Pardon?
What were the locals like there?
The locals, they were very good. We never had a problem with the locals. You might think you would, but they were happy to be there. And as being in the Army, they know we had a lot of money in our pocket. And like it was nice, I could just go down to the corner off the way, and there'd be a little boy there like shine your shoes for the equivalent of a quarter. And so you just sit there and boy, shine your shoes up until you can see your face in them,
You had the shiniest boots.
So there's different things, Well, oh sure, that was part of being in the military. Your boots, yeah, or your regular shoes. In mine, I wore regular shoes most of the time, but anyway, yeah. But our living place was on a little island off the southern tip of Korea, known as Yongdo Island, and so that was. We were there for. I was there for 6, 8 months. Well, you got another?
I was just about to ask you, what do you have any pictures that you took during that time from there?
Well, I had a lot of pictures that I took, and you got them on your laptop. But that's too much to show. There's certain things that, you know, if I drop back to basic training a little bit, this was a whole bunch of guys that was going through Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri with me at the same time. And we all had to endure the same thing. But one of my favorite pictures of my time down in Pusan in the photo lab was this picture. And you'll see there, I'm sitting in the driver's seat of the Jeep, if you can see that much. But because I only had 3 motion picture jobs in the whole time I was in the Army. One was about a month after I got there, the 55th Quartermaster Depot, a whole block area that had all various supplies stored there under canvases. That whole block burned. And it was a big, big, big fire at night. And so our cameras weren't geared for that. You know, if we had cell phones like they do today, we'd had a lot of good pictures. But we kept our Jeep up nice. And Sergeant Hendricks, who ran the lab, he taught me a lot about being in the Army and what have you. And I drove the Jeep because that let me go any place that Jeep went. If anybody had an assignment, I got to go, no matter what it was. No, we didn't have any maps of Korea. So the first time you went someplace, you rode with somebody. After that, you learned your way around, and that was it. So anyway.
If you don't mind me asking, in that photo, were you currently in the 507th Signal Company or the 24th Signal Company?
Well, this is down in Pusan. That was 507 Signal in what we called KMZ. And this symbol here was our shoulder patch there. When basic training was here in 6th Army, and then this one was Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, because it was just in school, you know. And then this was KCOMZ, South Korea. And then this is the 24th Division. Later on, we're going to get to, but the Taro Leaf. And that was up north of Seoul, but south of the DMZ. I never got to the DMZ in Korea. So that's just kind of the place and where we were. And so my whole time, you know, you have many different places. So I guess we'll try to, what's your next question? You got a good one?
I'm curious about the photo lab. Like, is that where you develop photos and such?
We could do that. We did not. If we shot movie things, we had to send that over to Japan to get developed. But all the other was all black and white, and we had a photo lab. That's why a lot of my pictures are in black and white, because I could develop them there in the lab, and I could print them out in the lab. It was training, you know. Mm-hmm. That's what military life is all about, is training when there's not a war going on, you know. Mm-hmm. So anyway, it served me well having that available. And so anyway, but Sergeant Hendricks, who ran the lab, he was a super guy too. And of course, I drove the Jeep, and he wanted to go out picture taking. Ed, let's go take some pictures today. So we'd hop in the Jeep and do it. We could do what we wanted, you know. But then they closed down KCOMZ, and the Korean Communication Zone, they called it. And they moved us, most of our guys from the lab there, up to 24th Division Signal Company, which was up north of Seoul. And I spent several months there. And so, until Christmas Day of 55. So anyway.
So you and your sergeant were like on good terms compared to your basic training?
Oh yeah. Well, Sergeant Hendricks was good, and in 24 Signal, the first sergeant was there, I got waylaid from my photo career because when I went in there, all of a sudden the Army decided, in all their wisdom, to take everybody's records and put them on new forms. So they needed somebody that could type. Well, I learned to type in high school. So I got pulled into the office of the company known as the orderly room. And I had my own typewriter there. We didn't have computers and what have you like that. Just old-fashioned typewriters. And I'd spend all day taking old forms and typing them on the new forms, you know. And then the first sergeant, Sergeant Girton, I never forget that name. He was a tough guy, but he had a letter to write. And I had learned military correspondence because you number the paragraphs. There are certain ways you always do military correspondence. And he liked me to do his letters. I made sure I had a good ribbon in a typewriter because we had plenty of ribbons. And B, if I made a mistake doing a letter for him, I'd do the whole letter over rather than try to erase it because we didn't have a good way to do that stuff. And as a result, I stayed in pretty good stead, but I was just doing what I would normally do. I wanted to put out a good product. And if that letter was necessary, well, that's what I did, you know, if I made mistakes in it. And, I could go into stories all over the place, but anyway.
What's military correspondence?
Pardon?
What's military correspondence?
Well, it's like letters and everything, and they have their own way of doing things. I had kind of picked it up, you know, reading things and doing things in the office. They did have a boy in there that was an official clerk typist, but he never learned to type right as good as I did. So that kind of put him kind of behind the eight ball on a lot of things, you know. But then I got to move out of that. The sergeant that ran the photo lab, he had a tendency to drink quite a bit, and he got tangled up with our first sergeant. But the first sergeant had another stripe than he had, and so the first sergeants got him transferred out and bucked down a notch from a sergeant first class to a buck sergeant. But then they needed somebody to run the photo lab. And so they thought, well, Ed can do that. You know, I had that knowledge. By this time, I was a Spec 3, which is the equivalent of corporal, but since we didn't do much shooting. Anyway, they needed authority, and then was another old timer sergeant was kind of parked in our company, and an old bachelor guy, and but he was a sergeant and I was only a corporal, you might say. So they sent him down. He was the authority and I was the doer, you know. And so I ran the lab, and well, you doing things like that, you can do favors for people. And this is all the way through the service. Sergeant Hendricks down, he taught me kind of how you get along in the service. And when we needed some plywood for doing something up in our company club area, it was surprising the different in the various labs, how often different officers from like a Navy captain or whatever they were, I don't know the Navy ranks well, but they would show up in our photo lab to have their portrait taken. And then a handful of copies made for them, you know, printed out. And the next day, 4 sheets of plywood showed up in the company, you know. And this is the way a lot of things went in the Army. And I was just the type of guy who could fiddle with stuff, and I knew how he worked it. And I was thinking once when I drove the Jeep all the time, we had a gas tank leak. The motor pool says, well, you can't take it out. You got a leak in the gas tank, you know. And So Sergeant Hendricks, he called up somebody over in the junk area, and I got time to go down to the junkyard and change the gas tank. Go ahead here. We need to keep moving. I make stories too long.
You're good. All right, so what do you consider to be your most important contribution in your service?
I thought a lot about that since I wasn't in a shooting war. I think the greatest contribution I could come up with was I was an ambassador for the United States, serving in the Army in Korea. And my job was to be nice to these people and things. And one of the most unique things that I liked to do, we had an office secretary down there, was a Korean girl called Moonbong Soon. And she was just a sweetheart. And you can't really see, but I had a little picture of her, a Korean girl. She was about 16, 17, 18 years old, but she could type and she had English, you know. And then I says to Miss Moon one day, I says, what is the U.S.'s greatest contribution this war to Korea? And she says, beer cans. And lo and behold, what they did with beer cans, and I've only got a little tiny picture of it here, but they would take beer cans, aluminum beer cans, and turn them into corrugated metal sheets and make roofs for their houses out of our old beer cans. And it was really amazing things, you know, like that.
And they were sturdy?
Huh?
The beer cans were sturdy? Like, they held up well?
I don't know. I was only there in Korea for about 14 months, you know, before I got something else. But another one of my accomplishments up there, though, that I liked, and this is just a little tiny picture, but I like to do different things. And I'd had a brother-in-law who was a carpenter, and when I was in high school, he'd have me on the jobs and with him and help him a little bit. But we got new Quonset huts put up. When we first went up to 24th Division, we were in tents, and but they built Quonset huts, and this Quonset hut was up on a hill. And the only way you got down, it was tough to slide down the hill. And they said, Ed, we need a stairway. So I got assigned to be the guy that designed and built the stairway. And I scrounged material and motor pool, and we had pole linemen, so we had to cross beams from telephone poles and what have you to make a little bridge out of it. And that's one of my greatest accomplishments there, was building this stairway up the side of the hill. And we had to go up and down every day to go to the mess hall. So anyway, so maybe we better move on.
What were some of the life lessons that you learned from your military service?
Life lessons. Well, there's a number of things once, and I'm trying to get back up on where I was. One of the biggest things I liked real well was when you had a problem or a little dispute about something, you never gave an excuse. Oh, well, that's just the way it is, or that's the way it is, and what have you. So a sergeant or a captain would come to me and they'd say, well, what about it, Ed? And I would stand up stiff and say, no excuse, sir. And that was the best answer. And to this day, when people give me a diverting answer to a legitimate question, it just gets my ire up. because it should be saying, I learned this, no excuse, sir. That's a term I used. And you can't use it today, but I see some head shaking other people who've been in the service before me, you know. So anyway,
What was it like to transition to civilian life after the military?
well, that was pretty easy. I didn't dislike the military or anything, and so quickly I had 2 months at working at the R&R Center in Yokohama, Japan. It was kind of a bonus. I won't go into that any more than that. But anyway, I'm trying to think. Oh, and that prompted me when the guys are laying around saying, well, I'm looking forward to getting out of the service and going back to school. And I realized I better get some education, you know. And I had my brother check some things out. And although it wasn't a full-fledged college, it was a business school, and it was down my alley. And you won't be able to see this, but the VA gave me $110 a month to go to school. So, and there it is.
And you went into business, right?
Yeah, after school I went into business and stayed in it, and all my life really went working in the insurance industry and then in investments and what have you. And life has treated me well, you know. So
How come you didn't go into photography?
I think we're. But anyway, well, I tell you, to be a good photographer, you got to be an artist. You got to think. And I got a son that's a pretty good artist, and he can take pictures that are not different than the pictures that I would be taking, you know. And that led me away from that area. And then the people I got with, I worked for the same family in Peoria, Illinois for 4 years, and then moved to Wisconsin and spent the rest of my life in business here, and ended up with a boss that was a fantastic guy that helped me a lot. So he understood what my strong points were, and he knew what he needed help with, and it turned out super. So end result, we had 4 kids, wonderful kids, 7 grandchildren, and they're all wonderful kids, you know. So I appreciate it. You got any more questions there?
Just one more.
One more.
I understand that you're an author, correct? You wrote a biography about yourself?
Oh, I've written several pieces. I'm a nut on genealogy. My dad was born in France, and so that triggers that. And that triggered a genealogy trip to the first time when I was about 52 years old. My wife and I went to France for our first trip out of the country, except of course I'd been out of the country and with the Army, but we went to France and went to the town where my dad was born, down in a little town down by Lyon, France, called Saint Etienne. And when he was 2 years old, his father was murdered, and a couple of years later, his mother remarried. And in 1884, they immigrated to the United States when my dad was 5 years old. And so that's where it all comes. And right now, genealogy database on my computer lists over 22,000 people that are connected in some way over the years.
Oh,
And that's something that I'm pretty proud of. And it's allowed me to write books about our family, you know, different ones. My mother was a Gray. I've written 2 books on hers and stuff, and trying to pay forward some things in life. And a lot of people don't want to bother with that, doing that stuff. But my God, when I pull it out and they look at it, they love it. You know, they love it. But that's fine, you know. I was happy in it, putting it together, you know. And so, but then my wife died just a year ago, and so now my family looks after me, and I live in a senior living center now. It's got any more?
that's the last question from me. Do you have anything else you want to bring up? Want to show off?
No, I think we're pretty much there. I think I've touched a lot of the bases that I wanted to touch, and we've gone over the 30 or 35 minutes a little bit, but hopefully not too much. I appreciate this, and I've touched on a lot of things that I thought were important to me. So,
Well, this was a fantastic interview. It was so interesting to learn about you. It was really fun.
you know, and it's just this final though, Thea here, you know, she's a special person for having this, because she's of Oriental birth, you know, where her family was, you know, Vietnam, and she's a wonderful girl, and she's asked a lot of good questions here, and I think she had fun seeing a lot of my pictures on her computer that I had that we can't show here.
We had a lot of laughs during that first initial meeting.
Oh yeah. But I'm known for, I can make a long story out of anything, so I gotta call it quits, I guess, if you've got all your questions done there. But she's a nice panelist here with me. I appreciate it very much.
You gave great responses. All right. So, in closing, this has been an interview of Ed F. Marconnet regarding his service during 1954 to 1956. My name is Thea Young's Pham. The time is around 1:45 p.m. Thank you to agreeing to this interview.
That's been great.
And most importantly, thank you for your service.
Thank you. You're welcome.